After hours of driving through nothing but dark, empty highways, my eyes were starting to blur. The clock on my dashboard blinked past midnight, and the fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. I needed to stop. I hadn't seen a single gas station for miles. Then, out of nowhere, this rundown, barely lit motel appeared on the side of Route 19. The neon sign flickered like it was barely alive, casting a sickly red glow over the gravel parking lot. A lone truck sat in the corner, rusted and forgotten, much like the place itself. It didn't look like anyone had checked in for years. But I didn't care. I was too tired to think straight, and the idea of driving another hour wasn't an option. I needed sleep. Bad. This whole trip was supposed to clear my head, figure my shit out after dropping out of school and the breakup with Sarah. All it had given me so far was too much time to think, long stretches of empty road, and crappy food from gas stations. Pulling into the shady motel? Not part of the plan, but what is anything? I parked the car, stepped out, and instantly felt the weight of the place. It wasn't just the isolation. Something about the air felt wrong. Heavy. Like the building itself was watching, waiting. But I shrugged it off, grabbed my backpack, and headed inside. The lobby was exactly what you expect from a place like this, dim, stale, and smelled like mold had been living there for decades. An old lady sat behind the desk, her skin pale and thin like she hadn't seen daylight in years. She didn't say a word, didn't even look at me, just slid the key across the counter. No small talk. No eye contact. Just this cold, awkward silence that hung in the air longer than it should have. The room was worse. Much worse. The bed felt like I was lying on concrete, the wallpaper peeled off in strips, and the carpet squished under my boots like it had soaked up something it shouldn't have. The TV? A relic from the 80s. Didn't even bother turning it on. But that wasn't the weirdest part. The door to the adjoining room was locked, bolted from my side, but I could hear something faint. A tapping. Slow, deliberate, like someone was on the other side, trying to get out. It wasn't loud enough to freak me out, but enough to make me pause. I stared at the door for a long minute, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. I finally managed to crash onto that miserable bed, hoping exhaustion would outweigh the creeping dread. But sleep was a cruel joke. The tapping started again, rhythmic and persistent. It wasn't just the tapping anymore. Soon, I heard footsteps. Soft, shuffling steps pacing up and down the hallway outside my room. I lay there, heart racing, listening. Each step was methodical, like someone was walking in deliberate circles, just outside the door. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My eyes were wide open, straining to see anything in the dark. I was sure someone was out there, but every time I peered through the peephole, all I saw was the same, empty hallway swallowed in darkness. The sense of being watched intensified. It was like there was something, or someone, right outside the door, breathing heavily, waiting for me to make a move. I kept expecting to see a shadow slipping under the door or hear a whisper close to my ear. But nothing. Just that relentless pacing and the cold silence when I finally dared to turn off the light and close my eyes again. When morning rolled around, I was desperate to get out of that place. But then I noticed something off. The door to the adjoining room was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it tight last night. My heart skipped a beat. There was no way I'd left it like that. I crept over to the door, my breath catching in my throat. I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. The room looked identical to mine, down to the peeling wallpaper and grimy carpet. But there was something different. The bed was neatly made, as if someone had just tidied up. Everything was perfectly in place, untouched. Then I saw it, a single piece of paper lying on the bed. It was old, yellowed, with edges frayed as though it had been there forever. I picked it up with shaking hands, trying to make out the barely legible handwriting. The message was chilling. You're not alone. Don't let it in. No signature. No context. Just those few words, hanging in the stale air of that empty room, as if someone had been desperately trying to warn me. I dropped the note, my heart pounding in my chest. The sense of being trapped here, caught in whatever this place was, had never been so real. I spent most of the day trying to shake off the creeping unease from last night. I convinced myself it was just my imagination running wild. After grabbing a bite at a diner nearby, greasy food that barely took the edge off, I figured I'd get some fresh air and maybe clear my head a bit. As I walked back to the motel, I noticed someone leaning against the old truck parked near my room. It was the only other guest I'd seen, a guy about my age, with a scruffy beard and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. He was just standing there, staring off into the distance, mumbling to himself. I was about to pass him when I heard him mumbling something that made my blood run cold. The thing in the walls, it never lets you leave. His voice was flat, almost robotic, but his eyes were wild, darting around like he was seeing things I couldn't. I stopped in my tracks, and he glanced up, locking eyes with me for a split second. The look in his eyes was unsettling, like he knew something terrible was coming and I was next. Before I could say anything, he muttered, "Don't stay another night." Then he pushed off the truck and shuffled away, his footsteps echoing as he disappeared into the shadows of the parking lot. I watched him go, my heart thudding in my chest. Back in my room, the tapping was louder, more insistent. It was as if the thing in the adjoining room was now actively trying to break through. My nerves frayed with every sound. I banged on the door, shouting for whoever was in there to stop, to just be quiet. Silence answered me, thick and heavy. Then, a laugh. Faint, almost playful, but it chilled me to my core. It was the kind of laugh that made your skin crawl, like someone was delighting in your fear. I recoiled, feeling a cold sweat break out over my skin. My mind raced with the stranger's warning and the creepy, persistent tapping. I knew I had to get out. I had to leave this place. No matter what, I wouldn't spend another night here. This place, whatever it was, had its grip on me, and I was not going to wait around to find out what else it wanted. That night, sleep was a distant memory. I tossed and turned, sinking into a nightmare so vivid it felt like I was living it. In my dreams, I was trapped in a motel. The hallway stretched endlessly, twisting and turning like a maze that defied logic. Every door I opened led me right back to my room. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker with each step I took. And always, behind me, was that shape. It was formless, an amorphous shadow that seemed to pulse and writhe. I could never see it clearly, but its presence was suffocating. I'd hear its footsteps growing louder, closer. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe, and every time I looked over my shoulder, it was closer, its chilling aura nearly upon me. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the room spinning around me. I scrambled to my feet, only to find my door wide open. I knew for a fact I had locked it before I went to sleep. The sight of it standing ajar made my stomach drop. Had someone come in while I was asleep? Or had I somehow left it open in my delirium? Panic set in as I stumbled to the front desk, desperate for answers. The old lady from earlier was there, as motionless as ever, hunched over her crossword puzzle. I slammed my hand on the counter, trying to get her attention. When she finally looked up, her eyes were cold and empty, like she'd seen too much to care anymore. "They always come back," she muttered, her voice barely audible. Then, as if the words had no weight, she went back to her puzzle, her expression unchanged. The casualness of her tone only deepened my horror. It hit me then, the motel wasn't just some decrepit roadside stop. It was a trap. People didn't just check out from here. They disappeared. This place fed on fear, ensnaring people like me in its grasp. I was trapped, and no matter what I did, escaping this nightmare was becoming more and more impossible. Into the parking lot, only to find it eerily empty. The truck was gone, the only sound was the distant hum of Route 19. Then it started again, the tapping. Only this time, it was coming from inside my room. It was louder, more frantic, mixed with soft whispers that slithered into my ears. I could hear my name being called, almost pleading, begging me to let it in. My skin crawled, my instinct screamed at me to run. I reached my car, my fingers fumbling with the keys. I tried starting the engine, but it sputtered and died. I looked up into the rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. There it was, the figure from my nightmares, standing behind me. It wasn't just in my head. It was real, its shape shifting and writhing in the reflection. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted back toward the motel, my breath ragged and my mind screaming at me to find somewhere safe. Maybe the stranger from earlier had found a way out. Maybe he was hiding somewhere. I threw open the door to my room, desperate for answers. But the room was just as I'd left it, empty, untouched. I stood there, confused and disoriented, my pulse racing. And then I saw it. The piece of paper from earlier was back on the bed, but now it had new words scrawled across it in a shaky, desperate hand. You're one of us now. The reality of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned to leave, hoping to find another way out, but the hallway stretched out before me, impossibly long. The motel had shifted, the once familiar hallways now a maze with no exit. Every door I tried led me back to my room. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with a cold, suffocating dread. I knew then, there was no escape. The motel had me trapped. I was part of its twisted game now, forever bound to Route 19. The endless loop of corridors, the relentless tapping, the whispers, they were all part of it. I would never leave this place.